Welcome to the Danny Clinkscale Reasonably Irreverent podcast. Insightful and witty commentary, probing interviews, and detours from the beaten path.
Welcome to Kansas City Profiles presented by Easton Roofing. When I was setting up for the interview with Bob Kendrick, he entered laughing. And you'll hear a lot of laughing during the course of our podcast with Bob Kendrick, the president of the Negro Leagues Museum. He's been in that position. And he's been with the Negro Leagues Museum for a long time, but he's been back in that position as president since 2011, and it's been a tremendous time of growth for the Negro Leagues Museum and baseball. The Major League Baseball has chipped in recently with a $1 million gift on the 100th anniversary of the start of the Negro Leagues Baseball League, and the museum is really starting to thrive. It has grown. It has had its tough times, but it also is in a position now where it's has a great national outreach. Of course, on Kansas City Profiles, we like to let you get to know the person a little bit better, and Bob Kendrick, as you will hear, is not from this area. He grew up in Georgia, came here on an athletic scholarship at then Park College. He'll get to tell you that story, raised in very humble beginnings in Georgia. The youngest son in a large family, all of whom really achieved some successes despite growing up in a town of about 500 with just about everybody pretty darn poor. It's a fascinating story. The museum is a fascinating story. Bob Kendrick will weave it all for us coming up next on Kansas City Profiles presented by Easton Roofing. Enjoy.
More of Danny's Reasonably Irreverent podcast after this.
I'm here with Joe Spiker, owner of Easton Roofing. And Joe, there's all kinds of roofing companies in Kansas City. People see their trucks, they see their ads, they see their commercials on TV. What separates you out from the pack?
Danny, you know, there's a lot of roofers in Kansas City that are good roofers that can put a good roof on, but we like to pride ourselves on giving you a good customer service experience. From the first time you call, you're going to get a friendly voice on the phone. We're going to let you know what's happening and when it's happening. And, you know, the other piece is some companies are small enough to do small jobs. Some companies are big enough to do big jobs. You know, we're right there in the middle. We can handle the little stuff. We can handle your repairs all the way up to your big commercial roofs.
So what's the best way for folks to get in touch with you at Easton Roofing?
You can find us at eastonroofing.com, or you can always call us at 913-257-5426. That's 913-257-5426.
Easton Roofing. Integrity matters. Cinematic Visions has been an affordable solution for professional media production in Kansas City since 2003, offering award-winning video production and creation, as well as a wide array of digital and social media management services. From planning, scripting, filming, editing, and post-production, to delivering your product to a watching world, Cinematic Visions will provide professional and affordable services for you and your business with the necessary return on investment to make it all worthwhile. Cinematic Vision's goal is to unlock the power of storytelling through video and a strong online presence for your company. Beyond the numbers, they want to inspire and evoke your clients to feel and act. Let my friends at Cinematic Visions embed your brand where it belongs, in your customers' minds. You can find them online at cinematicvisions.com or with a quick phone call at 816-600-6300. Let's have a brief conversation with David Schmidt from Pro Millennial. David, what differentiates you from other financial organizations?
I would say the passion we have for seeing our clients succeed is probably paramount to what we do here. There's no joy greater than watching a client accumulate wealth. I had a client that I've had for many years was able to buy his dream warehouse. Nothing too extravagant, but we had a savings plan in place and was able to see him fulfill his dreams.
And what else motivates you in this industry?
Well, lately it's been finding out inconsistencies in the marketplace, ferreting out some more than questionable ideas out there that what we're seeing with Bitcoin and a few of these other cryptocurrencies right now. I'm of the opinion where if it's untraceable, it really needs to be regulated in a big way right now.
To get more information and advice from David, visit promillennial.com or call 816-221-7775. That's 816-221-7775. We're here once again with Dr. Brad Woodall from Advanced Sports and Family Chiropractic and Acupuncture. Springtime, good weather's finally here. People want to stay active, and it's your job to make sure that they can stay active, and be healthy.
Danny, we see a lot of not just weekend warriors, but people that every day are having that want to get back to activity. Whether you're starting with walking, jogging, or maybe that first 5K of the year, we want to help you out. We specialize in taking care of all ages, from kids all the way to grandmas and grandpas, but absolutely specialize in getting you back to full function and keeping you in great shape.
So in short, how do we go about doing that?
The first thing is to schedule a consultation with one of our doctors and therapists so we can see how you move and how you're supposed to move. Based on our assessment, we can put together a short treatment plan and a set of goals to help you both feel better, function better, and most importantly, stay better for this year and many years to come.
Learn more at asfca.com/Danny. That's asfca.com/Danny. If you'd like to join these and other great sponsors and market your business to a growing and engaged audience, contact us at Danny@DannyKlinkScale.com. Look forward to hearing from you. Bob, you were born in 1962 and in Crawfordville, Georgia.
You didn't have to tell everybody. No, I'm just kidding.
You're younger than me, buddy. I guess the point of me saying that was the fact that you were born in Crawfordville, Georgia. Were you raised there?
I was born and raised.
Okay.
Yeah, I grew up there. Very humble roots, man. I mean, that's the kind of north central part of the state, east of Atlanta, west of Augusta, all of about 500 people. As a matter of fact, my dear friend, the late great Bucko'neil, says that I'm the only person from Georgia that he ever met that didn't claim Atlanta as home. Yeah, because no matter what, you meet somebody from Georgia, they'll say just outside of Atlanta. Now, they could be 200 miles outside of Atlanta, and they'll still claim Atlanta. But I'm not from Atlanta. I am from Crawfordville, and I'm very proud of those humble roots.
When I saw that, when you were born and where you were born, it made me think that as you were coming of age and your first memories would be in the late 60s in the South in a very turbulent time. But was that reflected in a small town? Or
it really was. My middle brother, Fred, was connected to King and the Civil Rights Movement. Mm-hmm. He was actually one of King's coordinators from my little hometown. And so, you still had, even in the late 60s as a kid, I'm still seeing these remnants of what segregated South was like, and of course the racial tensions that were there, even though Crawfordville was predominantly African American. Right. And so I tell the story oftentimes. I remember as a kid, when I had a brother that lived in Atlanta, as a matter of fact, two brothers that lived in Atlanta, and this was before the interstate, before I-20 ran from Atlanta all the way to Augusta, as it does now. And I remember when we would go to see my brother, that my mother would always pack a lunch, always. And as a kid, you don't really understand why this was. All you know is that it was in this shoebox. She put the wax paper in this shoebox. She was going to fry some chicken. It was going to be a great meal. She was going to bake a cake, and it was all inside this shoebox. And as a kid, you don't really understand. You just know that the food is good. We're going to eat good on this trip. It's only after you get older is that you realize they didn't want to stop anywhere until they got to Atlanta.
Right.
Yeah. And so as you get a little bit older, you start to understand that. And so, I reflect on that from time to time. And as fate would have it, I work in an environment where the backdrop of this story is segregation.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So what were your first memories as a boy in Crawfordville?
I had an amazing childhood. I really did. I tell people all the time, we were poor. And I didn't know we were poor because everybody around you had the same thing we had, nothing. So but when everybody got the same thing you have, you don't really know that you're poor. I didn't realize I was poor until I got to college. I get to Park College and I see all these kids driving cars and they got their own apartments and this stuff. And I call my mother and say, hey, wait a minute, y'all hid this from me. But no, I would not change my humble upbringing for nothing in the world. And my kids get tired of hearing me tell the story of how I grew up in a house until I was probably 10, 11 years old that did not have indoor plumbing. And so when they hear these war stories, they're like, okay, man, we've heard this enough. But they're absolutely true. And what it does, though, it gives you an appreciation for things that maybe others take for granted. Yeah, no, I was excited to get indoor plumbing. And I still appreciate indoor plumbing. And the guys that I play golf with today, they'll tell you, if you see me go to what they call them now, there was an outhouse, but now they're modern day, they porta potties now.
Right.
You won't see me go to a porta potty. If I go to a porta potty, that's breaking news. And they laugh at me now because, we had outhouses as a kid when I grew up. And so
you didn't want any more of that.
I don't want no part of it. They can call it these fancy names. It's still just a modern day outhouse is what it is.
So I read that your dad introduced you to the game of baseball. What was the home life like? You mentioned your brothers. Where were you in the line of siblings? And how many siblings did you have?
Yes, 6. I'm the baby of 6.
Okay.
And the youngest, that's the brother that's next to me is 10 years older than I am. Whoa. So I'm the baby, but it was almost like I was the only child because they were all of age and starting to get out of the house. And so, yeah, my parents, I'm going to suspect that I surprised them when I came along.
I would think so. 10 years after 5 others.
Exactly. And so, but no, I'm the baby of 6, and my father introduced me to the game. But even in my little town of Crawfordville, every Sunday, the grown folks would go play, they call it hardball. They'd have a hardball game at the park. And people would absolutely gather around, sit on the cars, and watch these guys play. And so baseball has always played kind of a role in my life. My town was too small to field a high school baseball team.
Right.
So we had basketball and track. And I just don't believe in running for the sake of running. So if they have a ball involved with it, I didn't want any part of it. So I played basketball, which is what ultimately got me to Kansas City, to then Park College, now Park University. Started off playing a couple of years of small college basketball before I got hurt, and then I stopped and just focused on my studies. But that's what got me to Kansas City. But I've been a baseball fan since I can remember.
What was it like as a teenager in that small town? What was the life like, and what was the life at home like? Your relationship with your parents and such, because as you said, your siblings were all gone. So.
Yeah. My parents, by the time I came along, I think they were a little tired, so I didn't have the same stringent rules that my other brothers had to adhere to. The rules were whatever I cook, that's what you eat. Well, I had a little say-so in those kind of things, and she kind of catered to me a little bit more. Now, growing up in a small town has its pros and its cons. Mm-hmm. The pros is that you know everybody, and everybody knows you. The con is you know everybody, and everybody knows you.
Right.
And so you couldn't get in any trouble because literally everybody had jurisdiction over you. And so it was funny. I tell the story oftentimes when I came to Park and I started to meet some of the guys, and we would be walking to campus and a car would drive by and I'd wave. And they would look at me like, did you know that person? No, I didn't know him. Well, why are you waving at him? Because that's what you do. I couldn't walk by Miss Jones' house.
Right.
She's sitting on the porch and I don't acknowledge her. By the time I got home, my mother was like, well, Miss Jones just called and said, you walked by the house and didn't open your mouth. And so that's that kind of small town upbringing. Tough on your social life. Yeah, because every girl that I tried to date, my mother said, oh, boy, that's your cousin.
Wow, that would be tough.
That's tough.
Yeah.
But no, man, I look back so fondly on those years of growing up in Crawfordville and just being in a carefree environment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, being in a carefree environment, 2 loving parents who gave me everything I needed. Now, I may not have had everything I wanted, but I had everything that I needed. And they were 2 who, growing up in the Deep South themselves at the time in which they did, they could only get a 10th grade education. That's all they could get. That was as far as they could go. But they always understood the value of an education, and they instilled that in all of us about the importance of an education. And they wanted, as I think any family does, they wanted us to be better than them. They wanted us to achieve at a greater level. They wanted us to have more than them. And I think we all want that for our children. Today, sometimes, though, we may be guilty of giving them too much. Right. Yeah, because sometimes I don't know if we gain the kind of appreciation for stuff that we would like for our children because they kind of take it for granted that this is the way that things are always going to be. People are just going to give me, And so, yeah, but they gave me everything that I absolutely needed. And the person that I've become and hopefully will continue to become is all due to them.
Was basketball the sole reason you ended up coming to this area to go to Park College?
It was. It absolutely was. I chased the basketball from Crawfordville, Georgia to Parkville, Missouri, because from the time that I was 12, Danny, I was going to Howard University. Yeah, 11 to 12 years old. I was going to Washington, D.C. every year to spend the summer with my brother Fred. And so I'm going to Howard University. And in my senior year, I had gotten accepted to go to Howard University. Mm-hmm. And at the 13th hour, I get a scholarship offer from Park College because Howard wanted me to walk on. They didn't have any money for me. And so they wanted me to come to school and walk on. And I was prepared to try and do that. And then at the 13th hour, I get a scholarship offer from Park College, switch gears, and left to come to Parkville, Missouri. Haven't looked back since. I've been in this area ever since 1980.
Do you know the story of how? I mean, you must. How did they find you? I mean, in the middle of Georgia.
I have no idea how they found me in Crawfordville, Georgia. I really don't. And I never visited. I saw the brochures.
Right.
I saw the offer. I signed and kept on coming. And like I said, I remember.
Well, we're kindred spirits in that regard. I went sight unseen to the University of Kansas from suburban Boston, so just went from brochures and such. So we did the exact same thing.
They sent me the brochures. Now, admittedly, they made it sound like Parkville was a little bit closer to Kansas City than it actually was. It wasn't exactly walking distance.
No,
exactly. But I'll never forget when I got here. My brother drove me. My brother drove me from Crawfordville up to Parkville, and I remember when we went across at that time, the old ASB Bridge. Mm-hmm. Man, that was one of the scariest trips I think I've ever seen. That old raggedy bridge, that bridge was just absolutely horrifying. And I remember getting on campus, and the dormitory that I was going to stay in, still remember this to this day, Deering dorm, and it was kind of old, and it had, if you think Wrigley Field, the vines that go on the wall, and it had that on it. And my brother looked at me, he said, "You gonna stay?" I said, "Yeah, man, I'm gonna stay." And I've been here ever since.
What was the course of your basketball career maybe not going as well as you would have liked?
Well, yeah, I think it was, you get here, and I love the game, and I still love the game. I don't play anymore. And so we had a lot of guys from a lot of different places playing. And I think what you learn about competition is that everybody was good from where they came from. I don't care what level it is. And so I got there, and it's really interesting. I think I became a better basketball player after I stopped playing. And for me, I kind of fell out of love with the game during that time. And I think, and that's what I told my own children as they were being recruited for collegiate sports. You really got to love it. You got to love it because they essentially do own you. They own all of your time. They determine what you do, when you do it, how you do it. And so for me, I'm not sure I was really as prepared to take on that level of competition as I thought I might have been.
Now, you were from a small town. You probably dominated the proceedings in your small town. Well,
in my mind, I did. I thought I was pretty good.
Right.
And I played pretty well when I got here. I didn't get a lot of playing time.
Right.
And I think you kind of fall out of love with it when you think that you deserve what you didn't get. But that's the beauty of competition. That's the beauty of competition. And then I got hurt. I broke my foot.
Okay.
And when I broke my foot, I think at that point it was like, okay, is this something that you really want to do? And for me, I kind of said, no, I think I just want to focus on school and think about what my next steps are going to be as I try to get out of this college at that time, now university, which was a great experience for me all the way around. Even the failures, of not maybe getting the playing time that you thought that you wanted to get or could have gotten, and that whole 9 yards. But it was a great experience.
What when you did decide to walk away from basketball, did you know at that point in time what you wanted to focus on as far as your studies were concerned, or where your goal as far as the
college was very good to me, and the coaches there were also very good to me, because what they did is allow me to kind of start doing a little bit of the radio broadcast of the games, and then I was always I was studying broadcast communications and journalism, or communication arts, And so I was writing about these games, and so they let me hold on to my scholarship, and I was doing these kinds of things to support the athletic department. So I was very fortunate from that standpoint. So yeah, I was starting to get a feel for what it was that I thought I wanted to do, and that's what ultimately led me to the Kansas City Star right out of college, even though I wasn't sure which route I wanted to go. I didn't know if I wanted to go to the editorial side or if I wanted to go to the advertising, marketing, promotion side. Well, as fate has it, I ultimately moved to the advertising, marketing, promotional side.
And what was it that drew you there, and what were your duties like then? The newspaper business was obviously a very different thing at that point in time than it is.
And it was, believe it or not, for people who know me and they see me wearing suits every day. When I was working at the Kansas City Star, my first job in the Kansas City Star, I was wearing an apron. Yeah, I had an old denim apron because I started working in the composing room.
Right.
Yeah, I worked in the composing room, which at that time we actually put the paper together. I'm cutting and pasting and putting the pages together as it was laid out by the editors, and then we would literally shove those in so that they could be made out of printing presses to go to the presses to create the paper. Now everything, of course, is done via computer, but it wasn't always that way. So we were printing out the text, cutting it, and trying to mimic what the editors had laid out. And then you learn how to work under pressure because you had the deadlines of trying to get these pages in before it was time for them to go to press. And so it was really interesting. But yeah, I was walking around in a not so stylish apron for the first 2 years that I was at the Kansas City Star. And then I moved over to what is called the Promotions Group, which was the Star's in-house advertising agency. And that's how I actually got involved with the museum. I drew the assignment of promoting the museum's first ever traveling exhibition. And so with the promotion group, we had done a lot of really cool projects supporting nonprofit organizations that the Star was involved with and trying to promote their events and those kinds of things, and had some success, won some awards. And I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. And my boss, a guy by the name of Daryl Durham, great newspaper guy, he asked me about this role with the museum in terms of, would you be interested in leading the campaign for the museum? We're going to look like we're going to donate some print space for the museum to promote a traveling exhibition. And I was like, yo, this sounds like great. I'm a baseball fan. I'm a baseball fan. Did not realize how little I knew about the history of the Negro Leagues until that took place. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that is neat. So you come to Kansas City, now you have a job, you're a working man. How did the course come that you would meet your wife and raise a family?
Well, after I leave the Star, I worked from the Star from 85 to 95, and I left in 95 to go work at Kaiser Permanente. And my wife, my future wife, worked at Kaiser.
Okay.
She worked at Kaiser in the public affairs department, the same department that I worked in. She ultimately left and went to Sprint. And then we had, as I tell people, she courted me.
Well, you were a single man for quite a while.
Yeah, she courted me, and she caught me. And as the song Kansas City goes, one of them crazy little women, I ended up getting one. But no, we met at Kaiser. She ultimately went to Sprint, and then we got married in 1999.
Do you remember your first meetings and what kind of a spark or connection it was, or was it just something that grew?
I don't know if it was an instant spark. I don't, and then I think we both just kind of grew on each other.
Right.
Yeah, at some point in time.
Well,
yeah.
There you go. So now you're at Kaiser Permanente. You're in you're in the corporate world, and I think it was at that point in time that you got interested in being a member of the board of the museum.
Well, actually, I became a member of the board while I was working at the newspaper.
Okay.
Right after we did that promotion in 1993, the museum had its first ever traveling exhibition open up in the storefront space where Bayou on the Vine currently operates. And that used to be Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, where we had our first ever traveling exhibition and an exhibit called Discover Greatness. It is still touring. It is right now on display at the Yogi Berra Museum in Montclair, New Jersey. Yeah, 27 years later, that exhibit is still touring. And it has stood the test of time. And so that was my first involvement, 1993. Well, we drew about 10,000 people here to see that exhibit in the month of August. And you got to remember, that was at a time when there was nothing else at historic 18th and Vine, just the Lincoln Building. That was the only functioning building here at historic 18th and Vine, although 18th and Vine once upon a time had been a prominent African-American community. Yeah, but it had died. It had died. And so, but 10,000 people in the month of August. And so the promotion was very, very successful. And I think at that point in time, the officials here knew that we had something special, and that is what ultimately prompted them to ask me to join their board of directors. So I did a lot of the PR, marketing, advertising, community relation kinds of work for the museum as a volunteer for about 5 years before becoming the museum's first ever director of marketing in 1998, a role in which I had all the way through 2010. I subsequently left the museum in 2010 as vice president of marketing, was gone for about 13 months, and then came back in April of 2011 to become president of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum.
More of Danny's Reasonably Irreverent podcast after this.
Time to spend a few minutes with my good friend Jeff Dillon from Dillon's Heating and Cooling. And Jeff, what differentiates your company from others in the industry?
Plain and simple, we're honest. We have integrity, and we're going to do things right the first time. There's way too many companies out there that lie, cheat, hide things from the homeowner or customer, and we're not about that. It's kind of funny sometimes. I actually am so honest with some people, it kind of surprises them. But sometimes it's good for business, sometimes it's bad for business. But ultimately, it's the kind of business that I want to run, is an honest one.
And that family way of treating things is part of your slogan, and it's also part of one of your great features that you offer to customers.
Our slogan is like family. Our most popular maintenance plan is called the Family Plan. It's very similar to a lot of ones out there. The little tweak that we do to ours, 1% off for every 2 years. They have a continued maintenance plan with us. If they have a maintenance plan for 10 years, then we give them 5% off, no questions asked.
You can find out more about Dillon's Heating and Cooling and all their great range of services at dillonsheatingandcooling.com. That's Dillon's with an S. The phone number, 913-214-1343.
Hey everyone, this is Matt Llewellyn for the 23rd Street Brewery. Thank you so much for supporting local restaurants, especially through this pandemic. And you know what? We're almost through it. At the 23rd Street Brewery, we have brought in a few more tables. You can wear a mask if you want, or not. It's your choice. Other than that, we're open 11:30 every single day. So come see us at the 23rd Street Brewery in Lawrence.
We're here with Michael Barber, the CEO and founder of Microlight Corporation of America, the world leaders in laser therapy. And Michael, tell us a little bit about your product.
Our device is using a particular wavelength and power to reduce pain and swelling. My background is surgical lasers, but I've been involved with this particular device now for about the last 20 years, actually.
And I know that it works because I've had it used on me as well. And tell us about the relationship you have with your company and Canaway.
It's what I call a strategic business relationship, in that Canaway, the leader in the field of the cannabinoid systems and CBD oil, but our device used in conjunction with Canaway CBD oil gives a better pain relief outcome for the patient.
And if you want to get that pain relief outcome like I did, you can reach their local representative, Sherry McCants, at 515-208-6312. That's 515-208-6312. I'm here with Tim Emerson, the owner of Emerson & Company. And Tim, give us an idea of the range of services that you provide from Emerson & Company.
At Emerson & Company, we do credit card processing, payroll services. We do bookkeeping, merchant accounts like point-of-sale systems.
What would you say differentiates you from other companies in the field, and what makes you special?
I think what makes us unique is that we're a small local business making regional decisions on companies. We create a profile for the business and then put it out to our different vendors in a very competitive environment and tailor those needs to the specific business, which usually ends up in a great fit or great result for the company.
And of course, the idea is to save money, right?
Save money, and actually sometimes I'm surprised where actually a solution that may cost a little bit more ultimately does save money, but we're not conditioned to think like that sometimes.
Emerson & Company. Check them out at emerson-co.com or call them at 816-360-9092.
If you'd like to join these and other great sponsors and market your business to a growing and engaged audience, contact us at danny@dannyclinkscale.com. Look forward to hearing from you.
Our guest is Bob Kendrick. He is the president of the Negro Leagues Museum and has been in return since the time he just mentioned. just before you returned, and actually subsequently in the first few years, the museum certainly went through some tough times and really needed a boost to get to the point where it is today.
Yeah, no, and that was part of the reason that I came back. The museum, and this is publicly known, wasn't doing well. And it had gone through a very difficult transition, going back to 2006 when we lost my dear friend, the late great Bucko'neil, and then ultimately an economic downturn that hurt a lot of entities in this country, particularly cultural institutions, and really a very murky transition.
Was part of that when an economy goes bad, a lot of times the people and companies and whatever who support things like museums see that as, sort of, well, that was nice while we were going well, but, to be a benefactor for a museum, but when the crash hits in 2008, that probably dried up quite a bit, didn't it?
You're absolutely right. And you can understand, culture and heritage, these kinds of things, these cultural institutions suffered quite a bit, because when you're going through a downturn like we went through in 2008, you got to help people. Yeah, because people were suffering. And so the arts seemed to fall a little bit by the wayside, because the health and human services agencies need that support, because you've got to help people. And so it put the museum and other cultural institutions in a very precarious position. Fortunately, we had built up a fairly significant nest egg, which allowed us to kind of navigate through that very difficult time. But we went through that transition, and I think as people will remember, I lost the job. I was up to be, at that time, it was the executive director of the museum, and I ended up losing by 1 vote. And people kind of remember that, and I think they made a decision to bring someone else in from the outside. And I think ultimately, as I looked at that situation, and I'm not sure that individual was ever going to be comfortable with me being there, particularly because there was so much public consternation about me not getting the job the first time. And so ultimately I made the decision that it was going to be in his best interest and my best interest for me to move on. And then I left to go take on another role. And then 13 months later, here I come right back to this role, because the place wasn't doing well. And I'll be honest, Dan, it was one of the most difficult decisions I've ever had to make in my life. I think a lot of people thought that it was an easy decision for me to come back. No, it really wasn't. It was perhaps the most difficult decision I ever had to make. And it wasn't just because I didn't get the job the first time, but because I think whatever little legacy that I may have had was already in place. It was already in place. People remember the great things that we were able to do, particularly when Buck was still alive, and all the great things that we had done for this institution. And so you risk that coming back. But more importantly, what happens if you can't fix it?
Right.
Yeah, what happens if you can't fix it? Because I know how we are as a society. We don't remember the person or people who messed it up. We remember the people who were there when it failed. And everybody would have been looking at old Bob saying, well, Bob, you let the place close. And so I'm really trying to weigh this thing out, and I'll be lying. You know you're not supposed to make these decisions with your heart. You're just not. These are supposed to be rational decisions. You're supposed to think these things through. I'd be lying to you if I told you I made the decision with anything other than my heart. Yeah, because every time I tried to make a rational reason for why I shouldn't come back, old Buck was standing on my shoulder saying, come on home. Come on home. Yeah, and so I decided that given what we had put into this institution for all those years, and even at the risk of possibly failing, that I owed it to Buck, and I felt like I owed it to myself to come back to try and make sure we could keep his museum healthy and whole. And I've been back, and we've had a tremendous run from that time on. And I tell people all the time, and I say this with all sincerity, I really feel like Buck is still looking over my shoulder and in many ways guiding my steps. I talk to him every day in some capacity. There's not a single day that goes by that I don't think about Buck and everything that he shared with me, the wisdom, when you got to make some tough decisions and these kinds of things, I just fall back and I think about, okay, what would Buck do? What would Buck say? And I think if nothing else, it just kind of gives me greater resolve. You dig in a little deeper, and you just want to do whatever you possibly can to make sure that his house is good, is strong.
Well, part of the reason that you had the opening to come back is because there wasn't success, and part of that, in many people's minds, was the fact that your predecessor thought that it was a good idea to separate the museum a bit from the legacy of Buck O'Neil. Yeah. This can't be just about Buck O'Neil. This has to be, and many people felt like they sort of deserted the legacy of Buck O'Neil.
It was unfortunate. I'm not sure why that mindset was so prevalent. If you understand what museums are all about, museums keep people alive. That's why they're here. They keep people alive. And for those who understood the importance to this organization that Buck O'Neil held, well, he was the man that built your house. Yeah, he's the man that built your house. So you always want Buck to be remembered. I don't want people to ever forget Buck O'Neil. And I think the other thing for me is that I was never afraid to walk in Buck O'Neil's shadow. Yeah, no. That's an honor to have Buck's shadow looming over me because honestly, I think it's protecting me. You know, I'm not sure everybody else would have felt the same way. And so it would be crazy for me to think that I could feel Buck O'Neil's enormous shoe. You can't. You cannot. No, but like I said, I draw from that spirit. And I was, like I said, never afraid to walk in his shadow. Where some would kind of feel the weight of that shadow and not want it, I wanted it because I felt like it was a shield. You know, that is what's guiding and protecting me. And so I think it was just because I had that relationship with him for so many years. And I think you're smart enough to understand, too, that there's still great equity in Buck O'Neil's name.
Sure.
People love Buck, and rightfully so. And so, yeah, this is his house. Yeah, how do you not want the guy who built your house to still have a role, even if it's in spirit?
Part of the reason that Buck became Buck was the baseball movie produced by Ken Burns. He became maybe the keynote voice of the particular segment about the Negro Leagues. And talk about that a little bit, and also Ken Burns is a very important person in that history, but he really creates some real, attention and keynote to very important things that he's passionate about. His most recent project was about country music, and he really highlighted the impact and prominence of African Americans in the country music world as well. So he's a very important person in this whole scenario.
First and foremost, he's perhaps the greatest storyteller from a filmmaking standpoint in the world. I mean, nobody does it better than Ken. And it was the epic documentary Baseball that catapulted Buck into national stardom. As he would oftentimes tell me, he said, "Bob, I've been telling these stories for 40 years and nobody ever listened." And then Ken gave him a platform in which people listened, and America literally fell in love with Buck. At that time, Danny, he was 82 years old.
Right.
And here you had this very charming, gentle man telling these wonderful stories to baseball fans that they had not heard before, and he was doing it with a twinkle in his eye and a smile that lit up the screen. And as I said, America fell in love with Buck at age 82. I'll never forget the headline of the Kansas City Star says, "A star is born at 82." When most of us are shutting it down, it jettisoned an entire new career and a new level of fame that I'm not sure he ever reached. And he was a star in the Negro Leagues.
Right.
I'm not sure he ever reached that level of fame, though, as he did through the Ken Burns documentary. It jettisoned a whole new career for him. God blessed him to live for another 12 years where he literally gallivanted all over this country, preaching the gospel of the Negro Leagues and the virtues of his museum to any and everyone who would listen. And it drove him. It really did. It kept him young. And it was only until that old 94-year-old body finally ran out of gas that we finally lost a man who we never thought we were going to lose. And we know that no one's going to live forever, but if anybody was, it was going to be Buck.
Right.
Because he had defied age for so long. He was so youthful. He was so charismatic, gregarious, and people just absolutely were drawn to him. He was drawn to people. And so he's one of the most inspirational people that I've ever known.
Major League Baseball has gotten more and more involved with the museum, maybe, to a fault that they should have been involved with it more before, but monetarily, as far as exposure is concerned, encouraging teams to come by the museum and things of that nature. Talk about your relationship with Major League Baseball now and how it has evolved.
Well, and on both sides, both Major League Baseball and Major League Baseball's Players Association. And we've seen this relationship really grow and evolve, and I'm obviously very ecstatic about it, because to have that, not only the financial support, but the visible participation means a great deal to this museum. It's almost like an endorsement. It validates how important this museum really is. And so when we all got together on February 13th to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the birth of the Negro Leagues here in Kansas City, and we went back into the old Paseo YMCA, 100 years from the date that Ruth Foster signed these leagues into existence, and the commissioner of Major League Baseball is there, and Xavier James, who's the chief operating officer for the Major League Baseball Players Association, and Mayor Lucas, the great mayor of the great city of Kansas City, was there, and Frank White, former Royals legend and Jackson County executive, and Mike Kehoe, who is the lieutenant governor of the state of Missouri. Of course, John Sherman, our new owner of the Kansas City Royals, are all there gathered in that space. And of course, it was at that time that Major League Baseball and the Players Association announced a $1 million gift in support of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. Well, you have to remember that's their second $1 million gift to this museum, having done the same thing in 2017. So, that fills me with great pride that, number one, the financial support, because we obviously need that support to continue to do the great work that we're doing. But again, to have their presence here means as much as the $1 million, because in many ways it validates, and I hope that it gives us additional leverage to go out and turn that $1 million into several $1 million to help support and sustain the long-term future of this great museum.
Well, in preparation for doing this podcast, we had to play some phone tag and such, and you mentioned bucko'neil gallivanting. You do a lot of gallivanting of your own in support of the museum, correct?
Man, I've been barnstorming the U.S. here, particularly in the month of February with Black History Month, and of course, tying that into the centennial celebration. I've literally been on a U.S. barnstorming tour from East Coast to West, and I guess in my own way now preaching the gospel of the Negro Leagues and remembering and celebrating what this rich history is all about, and of course the importance of this museum as the caretaker of that history. And so you have to do these kinds of things. You really do. I enjoy it as well, though. I really do. And the reaction has been overwhelmingly positive. People are excited about this story, and they're excited about the heritage of our sport. And it's exactly what Buck and the others who formed this museum way back in 1990, because lost inside this 100th year anniversary is the 30th anniversary of this museum as the voice of this history. And when they created the museum way back in 1990, it was because they wanted these players to be remembered. Yeah, they wanted them to be remembered for what they had accomplished both on and off the field. And that's what drove Buck. Yeah, he wanted to build a place where they wouldn't be forgotten. But I think in the final equation, that's what we all want. We want people to remember us.
Right.
Yeah, and so for me now to do this work and to be out there trying to galvanize as much support as I possibly can for this institution, it can get a little tiring at times because you're crisscrossing around the country. But man, it invigorates me in ways in which I can't even imagine. This work is as gratifying as anything I think I could have ever possibly done.
Baseball probably still unsuccessfully, but seems to be more and more trying to make an effort to get African Americans back to the game. Somebody of my age, you're a little bit younger than me, remembers the tremendous litany of stars, and one of the reasons the National League won All-Star game after All-Star game is because they were way earlier to the party and bringing African-American players into the game, and that has waned significantly. Mm-hmm. I mean, basically, you can almost say it's been replaced by Latin American players in much greater regard. There were some Latin American players, but far more African American players. Now it's sort of the opposite. Do you think it's a fight that can be won? Do you think the percentages can go up? And where do you think baseball is at in getting African Americans and attention from African Americans back into the game?
Yeah, no, I absolutely believe that we will see these numbers reversed. And I commend both Major League Baseball and the Players Association for recognizing that there is a problem here that needed to be addressed. The thing that we have to remember, and it's probably one of the most difficult things for us in this modern society of ours, patience. Yeah, we're not very patient anymore. We live in a microwave society. We want to see things happen almost instantaneously. And you have to understand that this decline did not happen instantly. This was a slow, meticulous process as we started to see the lack of African-American players in the major leagues till we got to this number where we are now. And the fix won't occur overnight as well. But I think baseball understands that this is something that needed to be addressed. They've started to put in measures now to help introduce this game to urban kids. And what we'll see, and as we start to see the minor leagues more populated with African-American players, you can then start to kind of gauge when the needle is going to move the other way. And they're putting in these places for kids. You know, number one, I think one of the big things was to take away the economic gap that our sport had almost created in its own way. Because unfortunately, sandlot baseball is a thing of the past. So you're not playing on the sandlots now. And so when you play it when it's organized, it is extremely, extremely expensive. And so that's one of the reasons why we're so excited about having the Urban Youth Baseball Academy right behind us.
Yep.
And to see kids being introduced to the sport. And then having a chance to see other kids play the sport at a high level so that it hopefully piques your interest and whets your appetite to want to compete. And then to have essentially a Negro Leagues museum basically attached to it. So now you can come into this space and see people who look just like you, who played this game as well as anyone ever played this game. But you know, the other thing, Danny, is that not only did they play the game, they owned teams. They were managers, they were coaches, they were team physicians, they were traveling secretaries. They fulfilled every aspect of the business of the game of baseball. So yes, we want kids dreaming of playing at that next level in the major leagues, but we also want them to understand where the other opportunities might lie in this sport and how to prepare to compete for those opportunities. And so it's a very holistic kind of approach. We want to build these athletes, but we also want to build great people. And I think that's what we're attempting to do. But I think you're going to see those numbers shift over time. We just have to be patient.
You obviously are proud of what you've done. Give me a sense of the legacy you think the Negro Leagues Museum has and where you think the future of the museum is headed.
Well, we're obviously very proud because here we are 30 years later. And I can tell you now, when we started this museum in a one-room office across the street inside the Lincoln Building, in an office not as big as this space that we're recording this right now, no one gave the Negro Leagues Museum any chance of succeeding because we were going to build this museum here at historic 18th and Vine at a time when there was nothing at 18th and Vine. And honestly, some of our most ardent supporters were really against us building here, and you can understand why, because there was nothing else here. So the question is, who's going to come see you? There's no built-in foot traffic. And Buck O'Neil, for all of his infinite wisdom, said, this is where we will build this museum. This is where the origins of this history began. We will build this museum here, and in doing so, we will help resurrect historic 18th and Vine. That's exactly what we've done. And so for us, it was never a self-serving proposition. This was always about the greater good because there were likely better business opportunities for the Negro Leagues Museum to locate somewhere else where you did have that built-in foot traffic, but it was never self-serving. We wanted to be a part of helping resurrect historic 18th and Vine. And I can tell you, very few museums carry that burden. we carried it very proudly. And so, yes, as we reflect now 30 years later, we are very proud of what we've seen happen here at 18th and Vine. People are living here. People are playing here. People are working here. And we still think that we've only scratched the surface in what 18th and Vine can be. And so I think that's one of the reasons why people in this community have really gained a strong affinity for what this museum has represented, because they know that this museum has been the anchor of that attempted effort to resurrect historic 18th and Vine. And so now as we look at the future, we think the future is very bright. Like I said, I think we've just scratched the surface in terms of what this institution can be. Initially, we put our focus on building a great attraction, because that's what you had to do. You had to hook people into wanting to come and experience it. Now it's about becoming a great institution. And that occurs, I think, as we move forward with the building of the bucko'neil Education and Research Center and start this next phase of growth for the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. We want to be that institution when we have these very sensitive but needed conversations in and around race and sports. We want people to turn to the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. We want to be looked at as one of the voices and one of the levels of expertise when it comes to that area, because ultimately that is what this story is all about. It's about race and sports. And so thus that starts the next phase of growth for our institution. You know, we're starting to look at opportunities to create satellite exhibitions across the country, because we smartly focused on the national, more broader story. We can't tell every city's history the way that it should. So Chicago has its own history as it relates to black baseball. Indianapolis has its history. The New York area has its history, Atlanta and Baltimore. So we're starting to look where there might be these satellite exhibition opportunities in the hopes of creating almost a Smithsonian-like affiliation of local regional museums, with all roads coming back to the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, and being able to get the story out in a much more expansive manner, being able to broaden our licensing program and looking at traveling exhibition opportunities and those things that would go along with that. We're continuing to build traveling exhibitions. We will debut a brand new exhibition on April 15th called Barrier Breakers, and the Barrier Breaker exhibit will chronicle all of the players who broke their respective major league teams' color barriers, from Jackie Robinson in 1947 with the Brooklyn Dodgers through Pumpsie Green, who will become the last player to integrate with Boston in 1959. Well, it didn't get any easier for Pumpsie Green in 1959 than it did for Jackie in 1947. And so we know Jackie's story very intimately, and rightfully so. He was that pioneering, trailblazing first. But the others who broke the color barrier with their teams, they deserve to be more than just a footnote, because they all went through their own level of trial and tribulation as they were trying to ascend to this opportunity to play in the major leagues. And for me, if we don't tell these stories, who will? And so we've got designed to create as many as 3 more traveling exhibitions over the next 5 to 7 years, and all of them uniquely tell a different story. And so most of those guys who broke the color barrier in Major League Baseball came from the Negro Leagues. Not all of them, but the more majority of them came from the Negro Leagues, which is ultimately what put the Negro Leagues out of business.
This podcast was made possible by our great sponsors like Easton Roofing, the presenting sponsor of Kansas City Profiles at the Danny Kling Scale Reasonably Irreverent podcast. Easton Roofing, where integrity matters. We hope you enjoyed the latest Danny Kling Scale Reasonably Irreverent podcast. Come back soon for something fresh and new. This podcast was made possible by our great sponsors like Easton Roofing, the presenting sponsor of Kansas City Profiles at the Danny Kling Scale Reasonably Irreverent podcast. Easton Roofing, where integrity matters. We hope you enjoyed the latest Danny Kling Scale Reasonably Irreverent podcast. Come back soon for something fresh and new.